You can cut it, paste it, erase it. You can be the change if you make it. You can cook it, sew it, or fake it if you're like-minded. Welcome to Like-Minded, where I conspire to inspire you. Today's show is a real profile piece. You know, silhouettes have been around for so long. They were made popular in the 18th and 19th century as an inexpensive way to capture a person's likeness, also known as shadow art. As you can see, I'm a huge fan of the art form, and I know you are too. That's why I want you to meet world-renowned silhouette and street portrait artist, Charles Burns. Well, hello, Charles. Thank you so much for joining me on Like-Minded. I am such a huge fan of your work, and I cannot wait to dig into what makes silhouette art so compelling.
Thank you, John. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I love the way I'm looking at you with your dress and everything like that. I know it's your trademark, but it's just fantastic to see. And from a silhouettist point of view, it's like a dream come true. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to talk to you. That we have so much to talk about, and there's so much to know. I've had a lifelong fascination with silhouettes, and I have so many questions because we don't come across silhouette artists very often, especially silhouette artists at your level of work and the way that you do your work. What do you think it is about silhouettes that capture our hearts and minds so much for all these generations?
That's a really interesting question. What is it that that captures us, our imaginations? I think the thing in silhouettes that really appeals to people is something to do with nostalgia. There's a sort of feeling that I always think that myself as a silhouette artist, I'm a contemporary artist, but at the same time, I'm aware that I'm harking back to what was a very old 18th and 19th century art form. And there's something about the silhouette which is both old-fashioned and yet contemporary at the same time, and it seems to straddle a world of different possibilities. And so when people look at a silhouette, they're somehow taken back to an era of their parents or their grandparents, but at the same time they see themselves in contemporary dress and the way they are today. And for me, that's always a challenge, but I think that's what it is that appeals to people in silhouettes.
I agree. And didn't the silhouettes start out as an economical way for people to preserve the likeness of their loved ones?
Yeah, absolutely they did. They were the poor man's portrait. Most people in the days before photography, most people couldn't afford to have a portrait painted because it was an expensive process and a time-consuming process. But almost anybody could afford to go out and get their silhouettes done. And I think the first silhouettists that used to work in London, at least, they used to paint rather than cut out their silhouettes. But even so, painting a silhouette in one line with a brush was a much quicker process than doing a miniature portrait, or certainly than a full-size portrait.
Right. Yeah, that's so fascinating. And didn't they used to trace put a person in front of a piece of paper with a light on them and trace their shadow? Didn't they kind of cheat it a little bit that way? They didn't freehand it the way that you do it.
I'm not sure that I would call shadow tracing cheating, but it's certainly true that artists of the 18th century used to trace a shadow. The first illustrations I've seen of this was something using a shadowgraph screen, where they actually used to sit the subject next to a glass screen, and they put a piece of paper on the other side of the glass, and then they light a candle some distance away, and the candle would be bright enough in a darkened room to actually cast a shadow onto the paper, and then they would just draw exactly around the shadow. And I've actually tried this. I did this as an experiment a few years ago while we were researching for a film project. And it's really surprising that how bright a candle is in a darkened room. You'd think a single candle, you wouldn't be able to see anything.
Right.
But what they used to do is they used to impregnate the paper with linseed oil. And that somehow made the paper translucent. And also it took the graphite out of a pencil, and so the pencil makes actually quite a very black line. And if you do that, it's quite possible, even with quite thick paper, to trace a shadow. It's fascinating.
Oh, so it seems like the size of the silhouette would be quite large.
Yeah.
They're dealing with a in-person, situation. And how did they scale that to the size silhouettes that we see from that long ago? Because
you're right. If you trace a shadow, obviously the size of the silhouette is life size, or perhaps even a little bigger, because the light spreads as it goes past your face. And then they would use something called a pantograph, which is like a series of interconnecting rods. The colloquial name for it was a stork's bill. And the pantograph would be set normally to reduce the silhouette to 1/10 of the original size. And so they would scale that down. And 1/10 actually is quite a small scale. Most artists today use work to a slightly larger scale than that. But that was the traditional size for Regency silhouettes in London, at least. I've got a couple of those here that were made that way, if you'd like to see them.
I would love to.
These are a pair of silhouettes which were made by an artist in London called John Myers. And he worked exactly the way you describe, with a shadowgraph screen. Wow. And these are, I don't know how well you can see them on the light now, but these are painted silhouettes, and they would have been originally drawn with a shadowgraph and then reduced down to size with a pantograph.
Was it ink that was used to do it, or what was the actual?
John Myers, legend has it that John Myers, he didn't paint his silhouettes with ink. He painted them with a mixture of beer and soot. Ooh. And the soot would be ground down to make a fine black paste, and then the beer acted as a kind of binder. So as it evaporated, it held the soot into the paper. So they are actually painted in soot.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah. I must admit, I've tried it. I couldn't make it work. I just got into a mess. But
they must have had a special kind of soot back then.
Yes, obviously, yes. They were burning something different in London in those days.
Right, exactly. You've been an artist your entire life, and you've always been, working in the silhouette medium. What inspired you to settle on silhouettes as your art form that you've come to be known for?
It was kind of by accident. When I left art college, I didn't think about becoming a silhouette artist. I studied painting originally, but I left art college with a kind of, I really didn't want to know what to do with myself in life. I mean, I was suffering a lot from lack of self-confidence at the time, and I hated the idea of going out to get a job. I thought that, to me, the idea of getting a job would have been like going back to school or something like that, where I'd been really badly bullied. And so my solution, I describe myself as one of nature's natural self-employed. And I just decided right from the outset, I had to earn a living as an artist, even if that wasn't particularly a glamorous way of doing it. I went down into the streets of London and earned my living as a street portrait artist, drawing portraits for tourists and visitors to London. And I did that for many years, and it was surprisingly successful. I'd be there 2 or 3 days a week, and I'd set up a little A-frame stand and a couple of deck chairs, and I had an A3 pad, and I was drawing portraits originally, and then I started doing silhouettes there as a sideline, and it was. I did them because there was a Spanish artist who came down to London, and he was a silhouette artist, and he stayed there for one summer, and he didn't do very well, and he kept grumbling. He kept saying, "Oh, these English, they don't understand my work. They don't know what it means to be a true artist. They don't appreciate what I do." But I was watching him and thinking to myself, but they're not actually very good. They didn't, to me, they didn't look that much like the people. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm sure I could do better than that. So when he left, which he did after a few months, I gave it a go. I just bought a pair of scissors and went out and started cutting silhouettes, and found I could do better than he did.
But never encouraged you to draw them first.
No, I've never drawn them. I've never once drawn a silhouette, at least not until much later, when I began experimenting with old-fashioned techniques.
Yeah.
But right from the start, it seemed to me that the way to cut silhouettes was to just pick up and cut freehand with scissors.
What goes through your mind when you're literally using scissors like people would use a paintbrush or a pencil? Like, it is mind-blowing to me that you can literally pick up a piece of paper and scissors and just freehand it, and it's such a effortless flow, and it's mesmerizing.
But yes, you're right. When I'm cutting a silhouette, it's almost like I'm not thinking at all. It's almost like my mind just empties, and I just cut. And I think the reason I do that is because I've learned over the years that if I try and think consciously about what I'm doing, the silhouettes tend to go wrong. I'm at my best when I'm not really thinking, and it becomes an instinctive process. And that happened to me, after I've been cutting silhouettes for many years. At the beginning, I was really thinking about every one and trying to work out how it would work. But it was only when I just relaxed and forgot about it and just thought, oh, I'm just going to cut it, suddenly they somehow came right.
I think there's a lot of good messaging in that. I mean, we should all follow your example in our creative lives and just trust our instincts on what's in our minds instead of overthinking things, which as humans we have a tendency to do.
Yes, so, I do overthink things.
That alone inspires me, the fact that you're able to master that. Is there a certain type of paper that you like to work with, a certain type of scissor, or can you do it with pretty much any scissor, any paper?
I can cut silhouettes with almost any kind of paper and any kind of scissors, but the ones that are my favorite is a piece of paper like this, quite a small piece of black paper. It's quite thin and bendy. There's nothing special about the paper actually, and I put a white sheet on top to help me see what I'm doing, because if you're cutting on black paper, you can't see the line.
Right.
The scissors I use are surgical scissors like this.
Okay.
They're not special. They're not particularly designed for silhouettes. I slightly modify the points so I can stab holes in the paper with them.
Okay.
But, those are my favorites. But then it's not essential to use favorites. And one thing I've learned talking to other silhouette artists, and there are a few, not many, but there are a few, is that we all use different scissors. So everyone has a favorite pair.
I would imagine small ones work the best because you can really
yes,
yeah.
Generally, small blades and long handles is a good idea for cutting silhouettes, and I think that's why surgical scissors are often a good choice.
I noticed there's so many, just like in a lot of art forms, but particularly painting. Everyone's got their style of doing silhouettes, just like they have their style in painting a portrait. What do you think is it pure taste level, or what do you think it is about the mindset of the person doing a silhouette? Because there's some silhouettes that I connect to and they feel authentic, like they could have been done in the 1800s, or and there's ones that feel a little bit too contemporary and modern that I don't connect to. What do you think it is?
One of the ways to tell, this is a slightly different question, I know, but one of the ways to tell if a silhouette is a good likeness or not, even if you've never seen the person, or if you're looking at a silhouette of a historical character, for instance, you may never have seen any other picture of that person. So you think, well, how do I know if it really looks like them or not? One of the ways to tell, if you look at a silhouette like that, is to ask yourself the question, can you see the eyes? Or can you see the ears? And of course, technically you can't, because the silhouette doesn't have any eyes and doesn't have any ears. When you stand in profile, all you see is the line of the forehead and the nose and the lips and the chin. Right. Anything that's inside the outline of the face, like the ear or the eye or the cheekbones, that all disappears. It's all just black. But when you look at a a well-cut silhouette, which really works, you'll find that your mind's eye fills in the space in between, and you find that you can see where the ear is, or you can see the line of the hair, or you can see where the eye is placed, even though those things aren't there. And to me, that's a really good test, you know. And whenever I look at a silhouette, I'm straight away asking, can I see what's inside the face? And if I can, then I usually take it that that's a good likeness. The silhouette has worked. In other words, they don't always work. Silhouettes can go wrong.
Yeah, I've seen them go wrong. Believe me, I've not purchased them for that reason. You know.
Quite right. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's such great information. I love that so much. You know, I've often wondered, you know, these things that you speak of that only you would know as a silhouette artist. And, you know, you obviously have a very amazing profile to do a silhouette on. Do you find that?
Do you want to have a go?
Yeah, you really do. I mean, I feel like I could accomplish it with your profile because it's so distinct. And do you find that distinct profiles are easier to do than someone that has maybe a less sharper featured face, like a rounder face? Is that harder to do than someone with a more angular face?
So you're asking about whether people with a distinctive, you know, with a very large nose like mine is easier to cut a silhouette of. You've got a very good profile for a silhouette. The answer is not always. Silhouettes are quite subjective, or at least they can be. And for me, because I work in entertainments, people book me for events and parties, and I wander around with a pair of scissors and some paper, cutting portraits of all the guests.
Yeah.
Then I really enjoy that way of working, but one of the most important things is the result is very instantaneous, you know, and people either they react well or they don't. And I've learned over the years that the hardest thing about my job is not cutting the silhouettes. I'm very confident in my ability to cut a silhouette.
Right.
The hardest thing in my job is meeting someone that I've never met before, and maybe have spoken to for only 30 seconds or so, and I'm asking them to pose for a silhouette, and I've got to make an instantaneous judgment. How much truth can this person really take?
Yeah.
Because if I, you know, how do I really put every, you know, every chin, you know, every bump on the nose, or should I just slightly idealize the portrait? And it doesn't take much, you know, it's 0.5 millimeter of paper, too much or too little.
Yeah,
can make the difference between a likeness or insulting a client, which you don't want to do. So, John, is this a good time to do your portrait?
I can't think of a better time. I think every moment is a good time to do my portrait.
Fantastic. Well, I really like doing them online like this. So I think it's going to work very well. And your hat is going to be a wonderful challenge. I need you to turn your whole body to one side.
Okay.
I don't mind which side. It depends on what you think your best side is. Okay. And you need to find something to look at straight ahead. Now, if you want me to get the hat in, is it possible you can back just like a foot or two further away from the screen? So that looks pretty good like that. That is absolutely fantastic.
Straighten the hat.
That's looking pretty good. Okay, so hold that pose for me. I'm going to take a pair of scissors and cut you out. And while I'm doing this, perhaps you can tell me a little bit about what sparked your interest in silhouettes, or perhaps some of the silhouettes that you've managed to collect over the years.
Well, I love silhouettes for so many reasons, but I love the time period. You know, my entire aesthetic is based around, you know, the early 1900s. And I love black and white. There's so many aspects of just the aesthetic of it that I love, but I really do love just sort of like that whisper of a moment capturing someone's likeness where it isn't so literal as a painting. And there's just something very, you know, seductive about a silhouette that painting just can't accomplish. And I don't know what it is exactly, but I think that kind of best describes it for me. And I love the way they look on a wall. I love the way they look in a collection of many of them on a wall. I just think it's so compelling.
It's fascinating to hear you say that, because in a sense you're turning around the question that you asked me at the beginning, is what it is that people find fascinating in silhouettes. For me, that there's such an important part of my life that I almost can't imagine being without them now. And so it's really interesting to hear what other people's impression of silhouettes are. For years, I thought silhouettes were just a sideline, something that I would do, and I was doing for a little while before I'd move on to something else. But now I've been doing them so long, I feel I've become the silhouettist in a really odd way. And I'm actually really like that. It's sort of become so much a part of my life and and who I am that that I can't do anything else. So, but now hang on, I'm just getting back to this silhouette. So you're about finished. I'm going to hold. You can stop posing now. You can turn back to the camera, as it were. I'm going to find. If I hold that up against the white door there, you can see yourself quite nicely.
Oh, that's so incredible! Wow, I am gobsmacked.
And we're going to. I've got a little card here. We can put that onto a card like that.
Wow, that is so amazing. Thank you. I mean, you're such a gift and a treasure.
That is a pleasure. I'm just wondering whether I should have got your moustache in, because your moustache, this is one of those things about profiles, which is very interesting.
Because they don't stick out.
They disappeared into your face, but actually I could contrive that and make it come forward.
It's literally become my permanent smile. Like on days I don't feel like smiling, my mustache does it for me. So because it's always an upward.
Let's try that. I'm curious to try this. I'm going to try a little experiment with you, if that's all right, to do that on Zoom. Because yeah, let just either maybe the other way. Should we try the other way around?
Okay.
Let's try this way. Those kind of it's interesting you call them handlebar mustaches, but you don't see many of them. There are not many people wearing mustaches like that. So for me as a silhouettist, it's like, oh, I haven't seen that before. I'm going to try something a little different.
Does it present a particular challenge for you?
Exactly, and I'm always up for a challenge. So I'm going to have a go at this. I don't know how this is going to work, but we'll see. Okay. So yeah, just look straight ahead. That's perfect. If you find something to look at straight ahead, that's perfect. And I'm just going to come and I'm going to cut. My habit with a silhouette is always to cut in the same direction. So I always cut around the silhouette clockwise. So essentially I go up the face, starting from the chest, and I go around your tie, and now I'm coming up to your chin. So I'm going to work on the beard a little bit and cut in the mouth. And now I'm cutting to the moustache. Now, although your moustache goes back into your face, I'm just going to. No, you don't. Well, I'm going to have to contrive that. I wouldn't worry. I don't want you to actually to wreck your nice arrangement. But that's essentially what I'm going to do. Yes, I'm going to bring the moustache forward in my imagination, and then having done that, I'm just going to cut on around the nose. And another contrivance like that, and this is something that silhouettists always do, and you'll have noticed this if you collect silhouettes, is I'm just going to put in the eyelash. Okay. And again, technically that's not correct, because if you look at your face, or any, especially typical white Caucasian faces, the eyelash is always set back behind the bridge of the nose and doesn't in reality protrude into the profile. But silhouettists have always put eyelashes in, and if you don't put an eyelash in, the reason is because the silhouette can look almost like the person is a bit blind. Oh. The eye is sort of missing somehow, if that makes sense, and so it's a slightly odd feeling if the silhouette doesn't have an eyelash.
That's interesting. Wow. Well, I do prefer an eyelash.
I'm quite liking this moustache. This is giving a strangely sort of steampunk feeling to it. I quite like this. So I'm just going to cut in the collar. Again, this is a convention amongst silhouettists to cut in collars and ties if they're there. And they do it by taking away the white areas. So I stab the paper with my scissors and I cut out the white spaces which show where the collar is and where the tie is, that sort of thing. It just creates a little bit of a sense of the clothes you're wearing. I just want to have a look at your lapel. I can't quite see it from here. Is that a sort of classic? Oh, it's quite a wide V notch. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to cut the lapel into the coat as well. Slightly curved edges. Okay, you can relax. You're all done. I'm going to hold this up. If I put that into the clever white space on my door there, you can,
Oh,
you can
yeah.
see yourself.
I think I respond to that one even more. It feels like it put something in there that was missing.
There's something there. Yes, this kind of, I've seen 19th century silhouettes do that with the moustache.
Yeah, I
But
love
because
it.
no one wears moustaches like that these days, so, you know, you're maybe the third or fourth person I've seen with a moustache like that ever.
Wow.
So,
In London, there would be mustaches aplenty.
and the silhouette you can see works either way. So it can either be facing right or left, whichever way you like. So in heraldry terms, they call one way to dexter and the other way is to sinister. So
Oh, that's good information. Wow,
facing to right or left.
that's so incredible. I can't help but notice that you have curated this door. Is it a cabinet I'm looking at?
Yeah.
Have you painted it strategically to be able to like?
That is actually the door to my front room. That is actually the door to my front room. And if someone walks in, it's going to just spoil the effect rather. But yes, I did create a dark blue frame around the white door.
Well, I mean,
Specifically to frame the silhouettes when I hold them up, because when you're working over Zoom, you need a white background to hold the silhouettes up against.
Well,
And
it's
that just
not only
works very
beautiful,
nicely.
but it's functional. And unlike minded, we love when things function and are fashionable. So function and fashion are always a good idea for me.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much for doing this. You are a treasure. And I can't remember when someone has inspired me so much as you have today. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Well, that just left so much scope for the imagination. If you like what you saw, don't forget to hit subscribe. And remember, nothing's off limits when you're like-minded.